Hi, welcome to the Innovation Summit 2021, the future of healthcare. My name is Christian Haddel, European Healthcare Lead at SAS, and I will be your moderator today. And we have an exciting lineup for you. First, we have Professor Dr. Koen Kaas, healthcare futurist with creating healthcare by default. Then we have Dr. Peter Bergstein, program lead, SweLife, on how to end childhood obesity. And last, we have Andrew Proctor, Senior Director of Enterprise Analytics at Cleveland Clinic, on how to transform into a wall-less, open, data-driven hospital. During the next 60 minutes, our three speakers will give you insights on the future of healthcare, with real-world examples of where our industry is heading and how they are working on making the future better. We'll end the session with a 15-minute Q&A with our guests, so please stay on after the last presenter and start sending questions in the chat during the different sessions. And then we'll make sure to pick up the questions and ask them to the presenters. Our first speaker is Professor Dr. Koen Kaas. He's a healthcare futurist and delight thinker. He's an entrepreneur, CEO, professor of molecular oncology and health tech, and a renowned international keynote speaker. Koen has also published his vision in 2 books, Sig No More and Your Guide to the Light, excellent books that I can highly recommend you to read. So please, Koen, the floor is yours.
Okay, wow, what a fantastic introduction. Thanks a lot. So I hope you see the slides completely because I don't see them in full full size. But yeah, now I see them. Fantastic. If there is one slide which summarizes what I'm going to try to explain, the fact that healthcare should become something by default, I think it's this one. This is a Wi-Fi wall at the beach, Peru. And only in the shadow you get Wi-Fi. This is digital, mobile, fun, nicely designed, and prevents me from getting skin cancer. Could healthcare look like that? Well, globally. And for that, I would like to introduce you to what I consider the biggest invention ever. This is soap. Soap managed to extend our lifespan roughly with 100% in the last 150 years. So if we ask ourselves, could we digitize soap? This is iSoap, by the way. I think that important learning comes from UNICEF. A large number of countries, well, do have way more smartphones than there are toilets. And a number of countries do not recognize the use of soap as one of the most powerful things to prevent disease. And even after last year's corona crisis, well, the crisis is not over, we have learned that something like soap can be really fundamental in, well, redesigning healthcare. So can we make soap digital? This is a pencil and a piece of soap at once, which is given to children in countries which do not realize that basic hygiene is something, well, to put forward. And they get a task from their class teacher, to make a drawing on their hands, a flower. The teacher makes a picture, sends it to a teacher in the neighboring village, and they say, well, we can make nicer flowers. And I am asked to find water to rinse my hands and to make a new flower. So the digital tool is basically a tool to create an experience and to make healthcare really, really fun. And that is the first thing I would like to bring to the table. That yes, we're going to move to a world which is more digital, but digital per se is not the trick. The trick is that digital allows you to remove frictions, friction after friction, and at the end, we hope that we can remove so many frictions that we no longer get sick at all. And basically, following on that soap thing, this is a company which launched just a few months ago. This is called Soap. And basically, Soap asks me who I am. Not just the classical questions, where do you feel pain, what's your history, but also questions which are never asked in the past. Questions which are called social determinants of what define my health. And let me try to explain what I mean by that. This is one of the highlight moments from the corona crisis last year. At some point in time, the Prime Minister in New Zealand organizes a press conference for kids, explaining what corona is, but mainly explaining that the Easter Bunny is an essential job which can still be performed, and so that Easter eggs will be brought to homes. And that's, well, nice to do. But the exciting thing is that afterwards, the Prime Minister also explained that the tooth fairy was also an essential job. The tooth fairy is kind of that, well, hypothetical figure which comes to collect my teeth and basically brings them in exchange for a small penny. And that is a cultural thing. That is something which is written in the kind of the healthcare of a number of, well, populations, and is part of our determinants of health. And the reference you see here is one of the nicest summaries I've ever seen of what I think is a gold mine of understanding that if we use these into the understanding of who our patient is and helping our patient to kind of teach disease prediction and teach disease prevention, that we have a completely new way to start looking to health. Look, for instance, at this slide. There is something missing on this slide. The lights are not on. And so, yes, I can tell my patient that he or she should exercise more, but if the lights in my street are broken, my patient doesn't dare to go out. So the data point I want to collect here is broken lights. And basically, as a doctor, I should rather call my city hospital and tell them, well, fix the lights, than to tell my patient, you should go and walk. That kind of real-world data point is part of the complete new collection I will plead for to start collecting and working with to really understand who we are as human beings. And to give you one more example, one of the biggest fears a patient has before he has to go to the hospital is basically the question, who will take care for his dog? And so at our major hospital in Brussels, the capital of Belgium, we installed a kennel at the middle of the hospital. The fact that the patient can take his dog to the hospital reduces the stress and basically enhances the chance that therapy works out. That factor is something which almost never has been taken into account into the holistic vision of looking to patients. And that's what we're going to try to do. We're going to look to patients in a completely new way and going to try to mimic a system which I didn't invent, which I stole from century-old China, where 3,000 years ago, the doctor got paid as long as people in the village remained healthy. And once you got sick, you no longer had to pay. Let that sink in. I mean, towards outcome-based medicine, that's the coolest we can ever achieve, but which we lost completely, I believe. We don't have healthcare any longer. And the reason why we don't have healthcare any longer is basically summarized on this slide. I can send a package from where I live in Antwerp in the north of Belgium to Stockholm, and I can trace my package every 5 seconds, which I find absolutely normal, right? But my average patient, my cancer patient, my cardiovascular patient is 8,750 hours a year by himself, not linked to me as a healthcare provider. So a FedEx package is better off than my patient, and that is not normal. And that is what's going to change in the future. We're going to use digital technologies and design IDs and experience IDs to enter into the real world of our patient, to be with our patient at some point in time, even 24/7. And in this way, we will be able to not just be the doctors who cure, but the doctors who can predict and even prevent. Now, to make one thing sure, yes, technology is an important thing, but the key thing to make this work is basically trust. And the coolest example I can kind of provide at this point, I think, from recent history is something which is happening in the States. Best Buy is one of the major electronics providers. They sell smartphones, they sell toasters, they sell basically electronics. And they realized that a lot of elderly people enter the shop without buying anything because they fear that a smartphone might be something way too complex. So they invested in teaching and educating their sales guys, in spending time with me and educating me that a smartphone is something even I would be able to deal with, to work with. And yes, I started to buy smartphones, went home, had a question, and I called Best Buy, and they gave me such a fantastic advice based on trust, that all of a sudden people started to ask, well, I live by myself in my home. Can't you watch me and prevent or predict whether I'm going to fall? Can you look at me from remote, and can you be the kind of guardian angel which prevents things from striking? Currently, Best Buy has a team of 60 data scientists which are doing nothing else than watching 250,000 elderly people still living by themselves in homes where all of a sudden Best Buy becomes a healthcare provider. The fascinating next step was that Best Buy just acquired a certified wearable, a patch, which can be used to run clinical trials also at home. And so all of a sudden, the people they follow, which are healthy citizens, tomorrow can be patients which enter into trials, can become patients which are monitored not by a hospital per se, but by an electronics provider. And that's entirely based on trust. And while yes, the next speaker will at least briefly mention Mercy Virtual as that hospital without beds, without patients, I often use Mercy Virtual again as an example, which is not about tech, but about building the trust that the doctor and the nurse still is responsible for the patient, and that technology can extend, well, the reach of the patient, of the healthcare professional, and keep the patient in its kind of comfortable environment, and the patient becomes at the point of care accessible by the healthcare provider by novel tools. And so when we started to talk about certified digital tools, people started to ask, well, where do we find these tools? Who has the list of these tools? And oddly, well, this list didn't exist. You couldn't write to the FDA and ask me, well, which apps are certified? And so we kind of created a database, which you see here, and you can have access to for free. So this is the database we curate of every digital health application worldwide, which is not a large number. That's only 255 applications. But these 255 are the first one I would like my doctor to know, to start using in his practice, to expand basically his reach to patients and basically become a better doctor. And therefore, to avoid that these kind of apps start to become new silos, which all collect data by themselves, there is a pretty exciting development where you now start to see the first health app platforms which stick different solutions together, plug into medical records, and allow you as a buyer, as a hospital, as an insurer, as basically a private practice, to buy a tool of certified apps into a box so that a patient or an end user only has to kind of upload his data once and basically can start to use the different applications in one single go. And an important point to link with that is that in that set of digital health applications, a number of them start to replace, well, classical medication, the classical practice of the doctor. And this I find a fantastic example. This is one of the 24 apps which gets reimbursed in Germany already as a so-called digital therapeutic. And the fascinating thing that this app, which is used to treat back pain, that patients are willing, even if it would not be reimbursed, to pay out of pocket something which has proven with real-world evidence that it can provide a solution which my doctor, my physio, couldn't provide in the past. And so the entire concept that digital tools will be kind of adopted by patients, and that the cost thing is not per se something which needs to be solved by governments, but that patients are willing to start entering, using them into their daily practice, was a fantastic eye-opening, especially in a country like mine, Belgium, where we are used to, well, a government which is supposed to pay everything. No longer so. And so if we start to see an evolution where things can become collected, we can start to ask, well, which diseases can we start to, well, not just cure, but reduce, revert back to normal and prevent from happening. And so what we started to do with our team is scouting worldwide for novel solutions, which when brought together in one basket, really could help to start playing with lifestyle of patients, but also with lifestyle of not patients yet, but into such a cool experience that people are willing to kind of adopt without that they feel being nagged what can be done and cannot be done. And this is an interesting example. This is Nestle in Japan. Nestle in Japan allows me to take pictures of what I eat. And based on the picture, and this is one of the most complex AI algorithms which I've seen the last few months, it suggests which supplements or vitamins I should take on top to, well, remain my healthiest me. And if you then start to combine these things with management of lifestyle, like, well, how much I move, it's not surprising that we see the first really big companies starting to become unicorns, which have proven that by behavior change, you can start to, well, by behavior change techniques, you can actually come as a doctor into the real life of your patient, show them new ways to deal with overweight, to deal with diabetes, and start to see the first real world evidence that something like type 2 diabetes is something we can manage. And this is an example which I always use to take some learnings from. This was one of the first players which started to do that, Omada Health. And they gave, well, people a very sensitive scale and basically a human coach for a few months, which helped me to use one data point, my weight, and ask me what I was eating, to teach me, to coach me to change, well, my eating behavior. And when the company started to get a little bit successful and they wanted to scale, they introduced a first digital coach, not a human any longer, a digital. And people didn't like it at all, because the trick was not the scale, but was the human coaching, which gave the patient the idea that someone cared for him longer than that simple patient physician visit, but that someone was with him, well, almost 24/7. And so the coaching part together with the scale then led to the idea, well, if the doctor knows that it can be coached, well, how can we get the data from such a digital health company into the hospital dossier? And so one of the leading providers of scales, Wittings, only the beginning of this year started to allow that my outreach of a scale started to become accessible for the medical record in my hospital. And so it's only since the beginning of this year that I can start to get my weight straight into my medical record. And you start to see that all of a sudden that patient is not per se linked to your hospital, but that consumer tools which access me as a patient allow me to provide me new services which in connection with your hospital start to follow me in a 24/7 fashion. And the number of things we can start to do really gets excited. This is Glue. And Glue has proven in less than 2 years with a few thousand, well, individuals that using the movement of my wrist, which is monitored by a watch around, that you can tell what I'm drinking. And you can make a distinction based on my wrist movement that I'm drinking a coffee or tea or a soda or water. The company got acquired by Medtronic. Medtronic, which is one of the leading players to start, well, dealing with diabetes by not just providing pumps and devices, but starting to invest way more in lifestyle management, where this is a fantastic example of a sensor and a data science tool, which all of a sudden allows me to do a objective measurement of a patient, of an individual, and start to be able to watch my patient in ways I couldn't do that before. Linking it to the default I started with, this might be next level. You can tell me what I drink. This is an experiment in Japan, where a drone flies into a service flat, and on the drone is a glass of water. It's something I cannot neglect. It's something, well, by default, when it's time to drink, I get notified that I can do something with that. And so if we take that one step further, you might say, well, we can do that with eating behavior, we can do that with drinking behavior, with exercise, we can do that with way more. This is a project we run with a pharma company, and where we have the first data which show that collecting the way people talk to their kind of home voice assistants, whether it's Google or Apple or Sony or Amazon, that data from these devices can be used to start predicting something like Parkinson's 2 years in advance. Before you see me shake, I start to pronounce my vocals in a different fashion. All of a sudden, I have a way to enter into the real world of my patients, well, of my healthy citizen, and collect these data as one single data point I can start to combine with others as predictors and preventers from things to strike. These are data we have from Instagram. Instagram, social media tool, where I send a picture, and before I send the picture, I add a kind of color layer on top. These are data from 3,000 Instagram users, which today use an orange or a reddish filter to send a picture. Within a month, switch to, well, gray or bluish, and 1 month later are depressed, which is not unsurprising. Orange and red are happy colors, are, well, emotionally rich colors. Blue and gray are very cold. Again, a single data point, but that single data point combined with my voice and kind of facial expression, all of a sudden allows me to collect who I am in the real world and to start providing me advice. This app is an app where I'm asking my patient to collect 1 picture a day, 1 picture. And if you look to these pictures 365 days a year, all of a sudden you see that in March, something started to change. The colors, well, disappeared, or people disappeared. It was only things. We went from color to black and white. That data point, together with other data points, all of a sudden starts me to allow ways to, well, connect better to my doctor. And it's funny that that allows us to start thinking about complex issues like mental health. I mentioned earlier that to manage diabetes or overweight, people want to have a human coach. Well, for things like depression or thinking about really black thoughts, I don't want to tell, even not my wife. I don't dare to tell my wife, but I dare to tell an avatar, a computer avatar, which listens to me and says, if it's really needed, I will connect you to a real doctor. And for that reason, I think this example of robot, which is my personal psy, who is 24/7 present with me, and which I use if I'm anxious, if I'm not sure whether I will manage, or which interferes in my life, basically without anyone knowing, but telling me, Koen, you're procrastinating again. Well, that starts to become examples of tools which we can start to think about introducing into our healthcare system, where we can start to think about ways where, together with our patients, we help them, we show them the art of the possible, and start to become doctors which way more resemble the Chinese one, which are no longer just present, well, a few minutes a year, but which become always present. And I think that while you have heard quite some hype around something which people call the metaverse, and Microsoft calls it mesh, that it's really something to start paying attention to, because we see patients, for instance, people with ADHD, which we can help with digital therapeutics like the one you see here, Endeavor, and which improve because you bring them into virtual environments. I think, and based on a number of experiences we have with patients with diseases which are enhanced by stressy factors, psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, that helping them by, well, bringing them into real meets virtual worlds are completely novel ways to create patient communities on one hand and to build completely novel relationships with our patients. And I think a fascinating example is something which is happening in Singapore, where the city, well, made a deal with the state, made a deal with Apple, and is kind of distributing smartwatches to the population and is rewarding health based on game-changing tools and toys where the population really gets money for living healthy into a way that I don't feel it as someone is watching me and someone is kind of preventing me from things from happening. And while Singapore might be kind of a poster child for a number of things, also in European countries, and this is an example from my country, we start to see the world changing rapidly. This is something we have helped roll out just a few months ago. It's a first, iteration of a new platform called We Are, and that platform has been built together with the biggest patient organization platform, together with primary physician organization, together with a foundation which looks to ethics in healthcare, and together with the foundation which is basically the umbrella foundation against every care home and every hospital. And this is a platform where citizens, Belgian citizens, can upload their health data, can provide answers to questions. They decide how much they kind of reply. They can decide who can look to this, the physician or researchers to work with this data. And then you can start to define what you want to improve. For instance, I'm overweight. I want to work on that. And I open my data to providers in my town, in my environment, which, for instance, provide me a service I didn't know it existed, which is such a cool, experience that I get that as access, as a push, not as a pull. I don't have to look for it. It comes to me as an offer, like going to the movies, going to a theater. It's going to the experience which will help me to deal with an issue, with a challenge. And the fact that we start to see adoption of this pretty fast, where patients say, well, wow, in this way, I want to deal and provide my data because I get something in return, was, I think, the biggest learning point for the last thing I would like to mention on where I see the world evolve to if these things start to kind of come together all into a bigger holistic fashion. Because the view, you can start to kind of predict this one, where data, which kind of generate knowledge and wisdom, start to allow us to anticipate things in advance. And if you can start to anticipate something in advance, you can start to reduce the biggest friction in healthcare. And the biggest friction in healthcare is getting sick in the first place. And that concept is really what is called healthcare delight. So if we then look to data, I see data basically an AI not as an artificial intelligence. I see that as a kind of a tool to anticipate, as anticipational intelligence, where basically you show me you give me the chance to share, and the more I share, the more services you can provide me, and the more experience can provide me to build new healthy services on. And I think going back to the model of bringing delight to healthcare, the model Disney is using to guide its customers in the parks is a fantastic one. Before you go to Disney in the States, you get a band sent home. A band with your name, the name of your partner, the name of your kids. And basically you start wearing the band, you walk in the park and you don't have to pay. That's the product. But the second thing that the wearable provides is when it's time to move from one spot in the park to another spot, to avoid a line, I'm willing to give up my location at a certain point in time because I get a service back, not having to wait in line for going on Avatar. But the coolest experience was the fact that when I came to the park, my wife got flowers. Was it a problem when she would not have received flowers? No. But the fact that I had filled in a form with the birthday of my wife and my kids, and that was used as a data point by Disney to say, well, you came here the 4th of September, and that's the date of the birth of your wife, the flowers gave such an experience that I will never, ever forget. And as a teaching point that a patient is really willing, if he gets something in return, to share something and to get a service which backs him. This is Japan again. Alzheimer's patients in Japan, well, they don't know how they get back to their service home, but they're traced 24/7, and they get a belt, by the way. If they fall, it's kind of an air belt. It provides them the freedom to walk out. It provides the freedom to their kids that mom is fine. She's backed and she's tracked 24/7, but the service she gets back in return is something kind of they buy into. And that brings me to my very last point. If we're going to go to a world where we can collect data, well, we should make sure that people trust what we do and the way we do it with this. And you might, I guess all of you are already using Airbnb. Airbnb, which basically provides a guy tonight the keys of my home, and basically that guy will sleep in my bed based on trust. Now you might haven't seen this picture. This is a picture of San Francisco, where every hotel in San Francisco is bluish, and every red dot is an Airbnb in San Francisco. One website where data get collected and collided on one single place to add services on brought hospitality to an entire city. I think that we are at the eve of connecting data into a healthcare environment which provides us the way to build platforms we can start to build experiences on, so that if we go back to, well, the points I mentioned at the beginning, holistic health is my physical health, is my mental health, is my social media profile, is the way I speak, is the way where I live, what the environment looks like, so that we can start to collect all this data into the first kind of digital versions of a human being. If I am asked to think about a new car, I will never ever get a chance to build a new car. I first have to use all the sensor data from building a car yesterday to build a virtual copy of that car first. It's called a digital twin. In 2021, for the first time, we start to become, well, enabled to collect all the data which define who we are as a human being, so that we can start to envision the first digital twins of human beings. And I think that these digital copies will become the personal assistants, which will be, at the end, the digital versions of our Chinese doctor, which no longer is just connected for a few minutes a year, but will be 24/7 present with us all the time in an invisible fashion. And yes, we will need new technology to build that. We will need kind of collaborative efforts to build that. But the fact that only the last few months, we have seen the first examples of digital twins which allow to manage a disease like diabetes and revert diabetes back to normal in a way that the patient feels it as a completely novel healthcare experience, I think closes my circle and brings me to my very last slide, where that saying that if you think about healthcare in the future, sometimes you can very easily inspired by things which have been done already. The Chinese model was one, and this is the very last one. This is Big Hero 6, a fantastic movie from Pixar about 5 friends which get to know a sixth one, a big inflatable Dr. Baymax, which you see here in the middle, which sometimes appears in my house, is kind of my digital doctor, and combines omics sensors to generate big data and to make machines smarter and more intelligent, but at the end, to change my behavior, create delightful experiences, and prevents me from getting sick. And with this way, I'm going to end, and I'm going to send you home with one question. What is it that you're going to collect from your patients as a data point, which makes you a better doctor, and which in the eyes of your patients makes you his delight provider? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karen, for enlightening and delighting us all. We will jump directly to Peter. Peter Bergstein is the leader of the ECHO, or Ending the Childhood Obesity initiative in Sweden, and I'll not say much because we are running a little bit late, so I will jump directly to you, Peter. Do we...
Just det. Jag har ingen bilder här. No.
We have sound here.
There is.
Nu pratar han om dig.
So I'll just give a short introduction until we have a video through to Sweden. So our next speaker will address one of the key solutions for a future healthcare system, prevention, as Kern also spoke about, because keeping our citizens healthy and out of the hospital and detect risk as early as possible is going to be necessary in the future. With that said, I'm glad to present our next speaker, Peter Bergstein, Program Lead of SweLife and Professor at Uppsala University. I've had the pleasure of listening to Peter on a few occasions, and the engagement and energy that Peter brings into ending childhood obesity is absolutely outstanding. So, Peter, I think we have video to you now, so the floor is yours.
So, thank you very much for this kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And I will, in a few minutes, try to summarize what we have done within the SweLife project. So if I can have the first slide, please. Thank you. And shifting, yes, let's see, the shift, this bar is coming. Thank you. Yes, so the challenge that Sweden and many other countries face is the fact that healthcare is overwhelming, both with regard to new technologies available and the limited resources. So this challenge, and I will give it just briefly a couple of examples from my daily work. So here you see two figures. To the left is a graph, or rather three graphs coming from an 18-year-old girl that is a patient of ours in our overweight unit at the University Hospital in Uppsala. So, and you can see how the curves, the blue curves, depict glucose levels during a so-called oral glucose tolerance test. You drink glucose and then take repetitive samples over 2 hours. And you can see that she has come to us on 3 successive years. And to the right, last year, you can see how the blue curve goes up and ends around 11 millimolar glucose. So she has manifest type 2 diabetes. And this is what we see happening more and more among our children treated at the overweight unit. On the right, you see 3 MR scans of the abdomen of 13-year-old boys. The one to the left is a lean person. White is depicted as fat and black as water-containing compartments. And importantly, the 2 boys, the middle and the right, they are both with equal BMI. However, and you can see it as the organ to your left in the scan, that's the liver. And you can clearly see that the boy towards the right has a more grayish liver. And when we computed it, he had a liver fat percent of 12%, which is high, indicating what is ahead of us. Now, let us make it a little bit more global. These are maps of the entire world depicting obesity in girls. And as you can see, with more orange paint, the prevalence of obesity rises. And you can see that when this was depicted a couple of years ago, the Americas were hardly hit, the Arabic Gulf, but also Europe and Australia and New Zealand. Boys and girls up and down, and the right depicts diabetes incidence. and you can almost overlay one on the other. So obesity precipitates diabetes and other complications. Let's see. And just to another story was put in front of us, that this has happened in the last 30 years with a 10-fold rise in incidence of childhood obesity. This is from this very large study published a couple of years ago. Now, what do we do to prevent this, to try to shift over from disease to health? And here are just 3 examples of how agencies try to motivate us to move towards prevention. So the WHO points out the effect of prevention in all kinds of different disease areas. The OECD prompts us to do this, giving a ratio of 1 to 6. If we invest 1 unit in prevention, that will avoid 6 units of healthcare. I was just going through the recent health budget for the just finished framework program for the EU, and less than 5% is spent there, which is also true for the OECD countries. So around 3% prevention and the rest on treatment. Now, back to Sweden. So childhood obesity was chosen as a case to try to see how this shift towards prevention were to take place. And you can see to the right just the demographic percentages, and this is Sweden, but it's also typical of other countries. And as you see, the percentage increases, and in Sweden more than every second person has overweight at this point. This needs to be stopped, and it's strategic to start with children. And as you can see, this is the heart of this strategic project called Ending Childhood Obesity, initiated just a year ago, and I will briefly summarize what we have achieved thus far. Oh, just there. Let's see. But before that, let's just review very briefly what has been done, because this has, as I said, been a problem for decades. And literature and evidence show that you need to take many different approaches. So a singular approach such as food intervention at preschools and so forth is not enough. And here are 3 examples, and I will introduce you to first, you recognize the recent report by the WHO, Ending Childhood Obesity report that came a couple of years ago, very timely. Bruce Lee has depicted how we see different levels in society which we need to address. And finally, Dargan and Whitehead, almost 30 years ago, showed us and coined the notion of the wider determinants of health, i.e., around an individual, there are different layers that influence the individual in question. Just there, okay. So in order, and this is the approach we've taken in this strategic project, we've taken a whole of community approach, and sometimes we call these municipalities or cities as echo zones. There, the task is to make the healthy choice the easy choice, being aware of that both heritage and environment will influence the health of the individual. However, today, there are no solutions available to address this. And the task, the mission of the project is to find not only effective, but also sustainable, so lasting over time, and also solutions that are worth to scale up. Just the next slide. So here are some, shall we say, conclusions or milestones. So we will take a so-called systems approach. We will address the different levels of society as indicated by the wider determinants of health. So accumulating data, and this is important, We want to be able to extract data at the different levels and, last word on this slide, collect them in a so-called digital twin. So creating a virtual copy of a city or a town, collecting data from these different levels of society, i.e. not only individual health data, but also from different institutions and so forth, creating this virtual copy of the real asset. Let's see. Now there we go. Just want to end up, acknowledge that this is a very big task and many people have contributed. And just to allude to some, European funding as well as national funding, and people coming from different places. Here they are all working towards better child health, which is the mission and vision of this 10-year SweLife project. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Peter, for sharing on this important initiative and also providing inspiration for other areas of prevention. And looking into how we in practice can work with the importance of prevention, I'm also very excited to present Andrew Proctor, who is Senior Director of Enterprise Analytics, Medical Operations Division at Cleveland Clinic. Andrew will share the strong learnings from years of experience in how to build a data and analytical driven organizations, which has contributed to bring Cleveland Clinic into the top performers of healthcare. Today, Andrew will inspire us on how to transform into a wall-less, open, data-driven hospitals fit for innovation and with focus on prevention. This is one of the best examples on how to democratize data and analytics across the healthcare organization. So please, Andrew, take the stage.
Thank you. Okay, so in 2015, we really kicked off our enterprise analytics approach, and I'm going to go through that story here quickly and tell you the 4 pillars that we focused on. So this is really, in 2015, we made the case for an enterprise approach versus sort of the siloed analytics shops in our organization. So digital transformation was a big topic in 2015. We have all of this streaming data coming in. We need a deeper understanding of population health. AI was on the horizon. Now it is fully here and people are expecting AI to be embedded in everything. So we needed to take a step back then to put in a platform and a process in order to allow us to keep pace with all these emerging technologies. So we took a 4-pillared approach. We said we need to focus on data, people, process, and technology. Historically, we had seen many organizations just focus on the technology piece. So they'd go all in on one vendor or one application and expect that to solve their problems. And it rarely worked. We said there's this 4-pillar approach will get us there. Data is your asset. People need to become more skilled, do some more upskilling and get them able to take advantage of the emerging technologies that we are bringing to bear. We had historically done a great job with dashboards, standardized reports, but it's really looking at how we did historically. We wanted to move up in the maturity curve to more of this forecasting prediction, and then ultimately, how do you optimize based off of the information that you're providing to your leadership? A lesson learned, we got to forecasting prediction. You can't really do that independently of optimization. So we would predict things, but we wouldn't change our practice to take advantage of what we knew was going to happen, change our operations so that it wouldn't come to fruition and that we would have a better outcome than what we were projecting or forecasting. So we had to choose a model. So we looked at Tom Davenport's operational models. I'm not going to show all of those. I'll show you the one that we chose. So we wanted to take a hybrid approach. So instead of just a centralized team or a completely decentralized, we wanted best of both worlds. So in our enterprise analytics, it's a centralized team, but it's really finance and medical operations that combined to create the infrastructure in order to enable analytics across the organization. So we became the center of excellence. We also had years of historical knowledge of the foundation and of healthcare, but we also wanted to enable these decentralized teams to be able to leverage the same platform that we were using, the same technologies, the same data, good data, quality data that we were providing, and enable them to do much more of their analytics almost as a self-service approach. So that is the path we took. But how do we enable those people to be able to take advantage of that infrastructure? So we shared what the expectations of those teams would be. So I sort of talked about the centralized team. What are we going to do? We're going to provision trustworthy data. We're going to work on the infrastructure. And we're also going to develop some training curriculum to help bring the rest of the analytics along and upskill their knowledge. Now, the responsibility of these other teams are that they're going to engage with us, they're going to use these tools, and they're going to commit to being stewards of their data as well as advancing their skills. So there are several ways that we approach this. First, we formed an advisory council. This has over 800 members on it. Anybody engaged in analytics can sit on this council, and we demonstrate other people taking advantage outside of the centralized team. How are they leveraging what we've built? And they show their success stories. We also advise where we are going as a centralized team. How is the infrastructure progressing? What are we looking at next? And they can advise us if we're on the right track. We also created communities of practice. So some are around the tools that we have an enterprise license for, like Tableau and SAS. And then our EDV, which is our enterprise data vault, is the data model that we put over top of our warehouse. So how do people interact with that model data to pull into their daily analytics? So this leads us to a problem that we had to address. So there are two important abilities: the ability to produce results and the ability to consume. So if we produce at a faster level than we consume, we've created waste. So how are we going to address that? There's two ways. We can make things easier to consume through our tools that we provide them, our visualization capability, dashboarding capabilities. But we also have to invest in education. So how are we going to increase the understanding of analytics and get our analysts overall in the organization up on that maturity curve? I'll talk briefly about how we have addressed that. So we started partnering with our local universities. We have an internship program so we can develop a pipeline for analysts to come into our organization. We have also started to develop certificates that people can take at that university. So they don't need to go get a full degree per se, but they can take some advanced analytics, predictive analytics, machine learning courses, and get their skills up quicker. We also looked at our job roles. We redefined those. So now we have an enterprise definition of what a data scientist is and the expectations to move up those rungs to become a senior data scientist. I already mentioned build the community of practice. So this is best practice sharing. and to share the ideas across the organization so that people can advance themselves quicker. The other thing we needed to focus on was data. So we hired a senior director of data governance, and we said we need to find the right balance. So governance can have a negative connotation to it. So what we said is we want to govern to the least extent required, but we want to enable people to get at data easier, but we want guardrails around that data. We want to make sure that we're ensuring security, safety, and that people understand the data they're using. So that was our focus for our data governance initiative. On the technology platform, this was more of a journey. So I mentioned 2015. Before that, we had invested, there were two teams. Enterprise Analytics was finance and medical operations. We had partnered over the years to come up with standards and a common data set, but we needed to advance that to the enterprise. We made that case to our executives in 2015. They funded us, and we were able to invest in an architecture that would enable future needs that we saw. So come 2020, we need to move into the cloud. We're not there yet. We have a plan to do that, but we are on-prem solution. Model management has become an issue. So as we've advanced in our predictive capabilities, how are we managing those models as they degrade over time? What are the expectations of a model as far as ethics and an ethics review? We're also becoming more of a data as a service, and we are working towards the digital transformation. So in that first presentation, you have all of this data coming from patients that's streaming in. How do we take all of that disparate information, consolidate it so you have an overall picture of a patient's health? So we needed the platform to be able to do that. So enterprise analytics is the core to this, but it's not just us, right? Now that we have expanded, and I'll show you a slide here shortly, we have all these other enterprise partners that are now producing information at a pace that exceeds the centralized team. If you look at our platform, and I'll cover this briefly, we are an on-premise Teradata application. We chose that for several reasons. The data lab concept was deployed where an institute can create their own environment within this platform. They can leverage the enterprise data vault, which is our model. They can leverage other views that have been built by the centralized team, and they can combine it with local data collected in their department. This allows them to do their own discovery. At the point it's ready to be deployed to the enterprise, it can be moved over into the data vault or into a view for others to take advantage of. We also did a deployment of enterprise SaaS so that any analyst can download this to their desktop and can do predictive analytics. And then we had a Tableau as our visualization tool. So anybody can go in and build their own dashboards. So how successful was this? If you look at the bottom right graph, you can see in the blue, these were dashboards built by a centralized team. The green are dashboards built by people outside of that centralized team. They are now producing 5 times greater level of analytics than those centralized teams. And in interest of time, I'm going to move here forward quickly on these last couple slides. So where we're moving, we're becoming data as a service. We are building a platform where we can pull in data from all these different areas: research, operations, leverage or partnering with information technology to make sure we are able to take advantage of the cloud and these other technologies that are. And then my final slide, from what we deployed, it has been very successful. When COVID-19 hit, we had all of this in place. We had the partnerships across the organization. We were able to deliver COVID analytics, predictive analytics, and dashboards to our executives. We also informed the state of Ohio, where we are based. They adopted our technique and deployed it across the state. As a result, we were recognized from 2 prestigious awards from IIA and TWI for that work. And it let our leadership know we were on the right track and we were able to take advantage of the infrastructure we built and that partnership. And I will end there. I know, try to catch up on some time here. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew, for some great insights on how data and analytics mindsets have helped your organization to continue to innovate and make sure you can act proactive when facing new challenges. It's some impressive numbers you show, and the scale and growth you have been through is very impressive. And with these inspiring sessions, we will do a quick Q&A session. We'll collect all your questions and get answers from the speakers. And those we will not answer today, we will send out to you in a follow-up email. So feel free to keep adding your questions in the Q&A chat at the left, and we will collect and discuss these on a later point. Let me start with the first one. That's for you, Andrew. You addresses the analytics gap in one of your slides. If you could give an advice to other healthcare institutions or healthcare or life science institutions, what would you actually prioritize to start to address this analytical gap in the organizations?
So for us, I believe identifying a curriculum, partnering with the universities to let people know these are the skill sets we believe you need to have in order to advance and take advantage of the EA applications. I think that is very powerful. Otherwise, people are looking to go get a degree, which we don't think is actually necessary to take advantage of that. The other thing I would say, as far as a gap, you're going to get to advanced analytics pretty quickly. People will start doing their predictive models. There needs to be a focus on model management and ethics around what you're predicting. So you want to make sure that you aren't, that you're addressing the needs of underserved communities, and that they aren't, you know, they're not limiting their access or quality of care as part of those predictive analytics.
Great response. And when looking to the technology side of it, we could see in your slides that you went from 1 or 7 terabytes of data to a lot more. How do you actually scale a platform and keep up with the technology? And in such a big organization, you also have places or sites in Europe now. So can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so it grew faster than we expected. So we ran out of horsepower, if you will, sooner. So we had to go back to the executives and say, we need additional funding. I think those community of practice, as we were calling them, that is really how you get people engaged. It also makes it expand quicker, but you're able to communicate across the organization so they know issues you might be experiencing and what solutions we're putting in place to address it. I would say that has probably been the best, is that communication through that advisory council and those communities of practice.
Great. Yeah, I think it's impressive. You're really feeling what it means to open up for data and technology in an organization. And if we turn to you, Kurt, you elaborated on all the new technologies that we have in healthcare. If you should point at one technology Which one do you think that the healthcare institutions will start to embrace first, and why? Oh, you're on mute, Kern.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. I'm going to link to Andrew. I think the biggest need we have is education indeed, because every doctor who's kind of currently at school banks and basically hears us talk says, well, the majority of things you talk about we haven't learned at school. So I think one of the biggest needs we have is that the curricula of, well, medical doctors or even scientists in general start to get up to date with the ability of what can be done and what is the state of the art today. That's one. And I think a second thing is because doctors feel often overwhelmed, and what we very often advise is don't look to all the possibilities. Identify one friction point in your life, well, in your relationship with a patient, and we find a solution so that you can start to explore how it makes your relationship with your patient better. And these are the two advices which we give already for quite a while and which we see get adopted and get things moving forward.
Thank you, Kern. And a follow-up on that, you spoke about the old Chinese system. Peter Bergstein also talks about that you need changes in the system. Do you have any, and you also talked about your amazing new EMR in Belgium. So do you see some incentives that needs to be changed in healthcare to make all of this become real?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think there is fantastic hope. So since exactly a year, we have the honor to work with 3 hospitals in Belgium, which came to us after hearing us talk about prevention and the fact that there might be a business earning more money in, well, let's say treating someone with pre-diabetes than someone with diabetes because you have 10 times more patients. So we got the mandate from 3 hospitals to install kind of a department where we teach citizens, so not patients yet, what exists to keep them out of the hospital, and that is sponsored by the hospital. I find that fascinating because that shows for the first time that it's no longer getting money from filling beds, but that's about thinking forward. And the way we set it up, we found partnerships. So for instance, we built partnerships with big retailers, and I think that comes back to the point from the first speaker. We built collaborations with retailers which get a chance to only provide healthy food in the hospital. In one of the hospitals, we have built a cooking aisle. And so we teach patients before they go home what it takes to cook healthy. And the money, it doesn't cost anything at the hospital. It comes from a third party. And this way, by building relationships and allowing other people to shine, you can start to change a kind of classical model and see the first results in conventional systems like hospitals. Yeah.
Thank you. And then a quick follow-up on that to you, Kern, on the citizen-centric approach with the national-wide healthcare record. Who will actually drive that initiative?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. So the behind the initiatives are 5 organizations, and it's good that it's kind of the physicians and the patients and the hospitals and the care institutions. So that's fantastic. And so now there will come a call towards the tech guys to open up people who are willing to build novel applications on that platform. And the big advantage is that I don't have to start collecting kind of background data about you because they are present on the platform. So I get an incentive as a tech provider to build all of a sudden onto something which allows me to reach initially 6 million people in this part of Belgium. And so it's it's a bottom-up approach. It provides the foundation and it invites developers and tech companies to start linking onto the platform.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time, unfortunately. I could keep going with this for a while. So, but I want to thank you, Kern and Andrew, for participating and inspiring us all, and also to Peter, who is at the castle in Sweden right now with a roundtable where they will discuss the topic of childhood obesity. We have a few more questions that we will wrap up in an email and send out to you by the end of the week. So thank you everybody for attending the Innovation Summit on the healthcare track. Thank you.
No, the pleasure was mine. Thank you. Very nice. Bye.